The wind was a thief. It stole the warmth from Eliza's bones, the moisture from her throat, and the last vestiges of hope from her heart. It screamed across the panhandle, a relentless scourge of dust and grit that scoured the very memory of green from the land. Her wagon, a fractured skeleton of splintered pine, lay on its side, one wheel pointing accusingly at a sky the color of rust. The horse, good old Gideon, stood with his head low, one foreleg held at an unnatural angle, his breathing a ragged counterpoint to the gale. He was done. They were both done. Eliza huddled in the meager lee of a sandstone outcrop, her husband's canvas coat wrapped tight around her. The fabric was stiff with dust, smelling of him, of sweat and horse and a life that had been snatched away as quickly as a summer storm. Despair was a cold, heavy stone in her gut. She had fled the pitying eyes of the town, the grasping hands of her brother-in-law, Guthrie, who saw her not as a grieving widow but as an unclaimed asset attached to a half-share of fallow land. She had packed what little she had, hitched Gideon to the wagon, and pointed herself west, chasing a horizon she could no longer see. Now, the horizon had come for her, and it was a churning wall of brown death. Tears carved clean paths through the grime on her cheeks. They were useless, an indulgence she could not afford, but they came anyway. Each gust of wind felt like a physical blow, pushing her further into the rock, grinding her down. The world had been reduced to this, the howl of the wind, the sting of sand on her skin, the taste of dirt in her mouth, and the suffocating certainty of her own end. This was it. The place her story concluded, a footnote in the vast, unforgiving emptiness. Through the shriek of the storm, a new sound pricked her ears. It was not the wind. It was the soft, rhythmic scuff of moccasins on stone. Eliza's heart seized, a frantic bird caught in a cage of ribs. She flattened herself further against the rock, trying to will herself invisible. She fumbled for the heavy Colt pistol tucked in her waistband, its cold weight a terrifying comfort. Her hands were clumsy, numb with cold and fear. The figures emerged from the swirling dust-like apparitions, tall and lean, their black hair streaming in the wind. 2 men. Comanche. Their faces were grim masks of concentration, their eyes narrowed against the assault of the elements. They moved with a predatory grace that made the hair on her arms stand on end. They had not seen her yet. She raised the pistol, the barrel trembling, the sights a blur. Then, the lead man's gaze fell upon the broken wagon, then Gideon's pathetic form, and finally, it locked onto hers. He stopped. The other man stopped beside him. They were no more than 20 paces away, close enough for her to see the hard set of their jaws, the unreadable depth in their dark eyes. There was no overt menace in their stance, only a profound stillness that was more unnerving than any war cry. The first man's eyes flickered from her face to the pistol, then back. He said nothing. He did not need to. The wind howled its own lament around them, a chorus for this final, silent standoff. Eliza's world, already so small, had shrunk to the space between her and these two strangers, a chasm of fear and history, with the storm poised to consume them all. The man who had seen her first took a slow, deliberate step forward. He held up an empty hand, palm forward, a gesture that was both universal and, in this moment, utterly inadequate to soothe the terror coiling in Eliza's belly. His gaze was steady, unwavering, and it seemed to bore right through her fear to the exhaustion beneath. The second man remained behind, a silent sentinel, his presence a heavy weight in the suffocating air. Eliza's finger tightened on the trigger. A single shot. It was all she had the strength for. But what then? The absurdity of her situation washed over her. She was a dead woman threatening ghosts. Her arm began to ache, the pistol a leaden weight. Slowly, painfully, she lowered it, letting the barrel point toward the dusty ground. It was not an act of surrender so much as an admission of reality. A flicker of something, not surprise, perhaps acknowledgement, passed through the first man's eyes. He gestured with his chin toward the dying horse, then back to her. A silent question. Eliza could only shake her head, a small, jerky movement. The gesture dislodged a fresh wave of grief, and a sob caught in her throat. He then pointed to the west, to a ridge of rock barely visible through the brown haze, and then to himself and his brother. An offer. Shelter. The decision was not a decision at all. It was the choice between a certain end here, consumed by the earth, or a possible end at the hands of these men. She gave a single, stiff nod. The man turned without another look and began to walk, his brother falling in step beside him. They did not wait to see if she would follow. They simply moved, expecting her to have the sense to save her own life. Pushing herself to her feet was a monumental effort. Her limbs were stiff, her joints filled with sand. She gave Gideon one last, sorrowful look, whispering a goodbye that the wind tore from her lips. Then she turned and stumbled after the two figures, who were already being swallowed by the storm. They led her not to a teepee or a village, but to a fissure in the rock face, a dark slash almost completely obscured by a cunningly placed fall of scree. Inside, the roar of the wind diminished to a low moan. The air was cool and still, thick with the smell of wood smoke, cedar, and something else, something animal and lived in. It was a cave, but more than that. The floor was covered with smoothed hides, the walls blackened by the smoke of 100 fires. A small, disciplined flame danced in a pit near the back, casting flickering shadows that made the space seem both larger and more intimate. They gave her a dipper of water, and she drank it greedily, the cool liquid a balm on her raw throat. They offered her a piece of dried meat, tough and smoky, and she chewed it slowly, the simple act of eating an anchor in the dizzying turmoil of the last few hours. They moved around the small space with a silent, practiced economy. There was no wasted motion, no unnecessary sound. They were a self-contained unit, their communication a language of glances and gestures honed by a lifetime of shared existence. Eliza sat on a hide near the entrance, her back against the cold stone, the Colt pistol now feeling foolish and heavy in her lap. She was a disruption, a foreign object in this spare, functional world. She watched them, her fear slowly giving way to a profound and weary curiosity. And it was then, as her eyes adjusted to the gloom, that she saw they were not alone. In the deepest shadows of the cave, another figure was huddled. A woman, or perhaps a girl, wrapped in a blanket, her face turned away toward the rock wall. She did not move. She did not make a sound. She was a knot of stillness in the quiet room, a presence so withdrawn it was almost an absence. The two brothers ignored her, their focus on the fire, on mending a strap of leather, on simply waiting out the storm. But Eliza could not look away. There was a sorrow in that huddled form that she recognized, a grief so deep it seemed to suck the very air and light toward it. The storm raged for 2 days. For 2 days, Eliza lived in the suspended reality of the cave, a world defined by firelight and shadow. Time lost its meaning, measured only by the rhythmic tasks of the brothers, the quiet scraping of a hide, the sharpening of a knife, the low murmur of their voices in a language that flowed like water over stones. They spoke to her rarely, and only in short, functional English. More water eat their names, she learned, were Kachi and Tarza. Kachi was the one who had found her, the older brother, his face a landscape of stoic patience. Tarza was younger, his movements quicker, his eyes holding a sharper, more restless energy. They treated her with a detached courtesy that was neither friendly nor hostile. It was the simple acknowledgement of a shared predicament. She was a creature they had brought in from the wind, and they would tend to her needs until the wind died down. She tried to make herself useful, using the small sewing kit from her pocket to mend a tear in one of Tarza's deerskin leggings. The work was intricate, her small needle a stark contrast to their more robust tools. Tarza watched her, his expression unreadable, and gave a curt nod of thanks when she finished. It was a tiny transaction, a fragile bridge across the chasm of their different worlds. Her attention, however, was continually drawn to the silent figure in the corner. The young woman, whose name she did not know. She never spoke. She rarely moved, except to accept the bowl of broth Kachi would place beside her. Sometimes, Eliza would see her fingers trace patterns on the dusty floor, intricate designs that she would quickly erase with the side of her hand if she felt anyone was watching. Her face, when Eliza caught a glimpse of it, was a mask of beautiful, empty sorrow. Her eyes, dark and vast, seemed to look at nothing. One afternoon, as the wind outside began to lose its frantic edge, Eliza saw the young woman staring at a small, worn object she held in her lap. It was a book. A child's primer, its cover faded, its corners soft with use. Eliza recognized it as the kind distributed by the mission schools, filled with simple words and stark illustrations. A is for apple. B is for boy. The woman did not open it. She just held it, her knuckles white, as if it were both a treasure and a torment. A deep, aching pity filled Eliza. She knew that kind of grief, the kind that hollows you out from the inside, leaving a fragile shell that looks like a person. Her grief was for a man, for a life. She wondered what this silent girl grieved for. That evening, as the fire burned low, Kachi and Taza sat across from her. The usual silence between them felt different, heavier, charged with unspoken purpose. It was Kachi who finally broke it, his voice low and deliberate. "Our sister is named Linri," he said, the words falling into the quiet space like stones into a deep well. Eliza's breath caught. She looked from Kachi to Taza, then to the huddled form of Linri, who did not stir. Taza stared into the flames, his jaw tight. "She was taken," Kachi continued, his voice devoid of emotion, a simple statement of fact. "To the white man's school. In the East. They took her to save her soul," he said the last words with a quiet bitterness that was more potent than any shout. "They taught her the words you speak. They taught her to wear your clothes, to pray to your God. They taught her to forget." As he paused, his dark eyes finding Eliza's in the firelight. "They sent her back to us last season. They said she was educated. They said she was civilized." He looked over at his sister, and for the first time, Eliza saw a crack in his stoic facade, a fissure of profound pain. "But they broke her. Her spirit is lost between two trails. She does not speak our tongue anymore. She does not speak yours. She sits in the dark. The life has gone out of her." Eliza's heart ached. She understood now. The primer. The silence. The emptiness in Linri's eyes. It was the gaze of someone whose entire world had been dismantled, piece by piece, until nothing was left. Kachi leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense. "We have watched you," he said. "We see the same shadow in your eyes. You have lost your world, too." The observation was so direct, so accurate, it left her feeling completely exposed. "Our medicine is not strong enough for this hurt," Kachi admitted, a vulnerability that stunned her. "Our ways cannot reach her where she is. Your people did this to her. Perhaps one of your people can undo it." Eliza stared at him, a cold dread mixing with her pity. She knew what was coming. Taza finally spoke, his voice rough. "We do not ask for work. We do not ask for payment for the shelter, for the food." Then came the request. It was Kachi who said it, his words simple, yet they carried the weight of a desperate, impossible hope. "We ask you to sit with her," he said. "We ask you to speak your words to her. Not the words from that book. Your words. The ones from the place of loss. Your spirit is wounded, but it is not broken. Hers is. We ask you to show her the way back from the dark. We ask you to help us find our sister again." The air crackled with the enormity of his words. They were not asking her to teach, they were asking her to heal. They were asking her, a stranger, a white woman, to mend a soul that her own people had shattered. It was a shocking, terrifying, and sacred request. A wave of inadequacy washed over Eliza. I can't," she stammered, shaking her head. The words felt like dust in her mouth. "What can I do? I am no one. I have nothing to offer." She looked at her own hands, chapped and empty. She was a widow fleeing failure, a woman who couldn't even save her own horse. How could she possibly save a lost soul? Taza's gaze was hard. "You have your grief," he said, the statement not an accusation, but a qualification. "It is a heavy blanket. She is wrapped in one, too." Perhaps the threads are the same. His words silenced her protest. He was right. Grief was the only thing she truly owned anymore. It was her constant companion, the lens through which she saw the world. To them, this made her an expert. She looked over at Linri, a silhouette of sorrow against the cave wall. She saw not a Comanche girl, but a reflection of her own desolation, magnified and made silent. To refuse was to turn her back on herself. To agree felt like a blasphemy, a presumption she had no right to make. But the hope in Karch's eyes, the desperate plea beneath Tarza's harsh words, they left her no choice. "I will try," she whispered, the promise fragile but real. The brothers gave a single, synchronized nod. It was enough. The next day, she began. There was no ceremony to it. After their morning meal, she simply took a hide and placed it on the ground a few feet from Leanery. She did not face her directly, but sat at an angle, so they were sharing the same view of the cave mouth, the square of bruised, post-storm sky. For a long time, she said nothing. The silence was a living thing, thick and uncomfortable. Eliza's mind raced with all the things she should not say. No false cheer. No pitying questions. Finally, she just spoke, her voice low and rusty from disuse. "My husband's name was Thomas," she began, her eyes fixed on the sliver of daylight. "He had hands that could fix anything. A broken harness, a child's toy, a fence post. He always smelled of sawdust and sunshine." She spoke of their small farm, of the creek that ran through the south pasture, of the way the light looked in the mornings, spilling over the plains. She didn't talk to Leanery, but to the space between them, filling it with the pieces of her broken world. Leanery did not move. She gave no sign she was listening. But Eliza persisted. Day after day, she sat with her, weaving the tapestry of her life and her loss with words. She spoke of her loneliness, the crushing weight of a house suddenly too big, too quiet. She spoke of her anger at God, at the town, at Thomas for leaving her. She laid her own wounded spirit bare, not for sympathy, but simply as a statement of fact. "This is me. This is what I have lost." One afternoon, while describing the quilt her mother had made for her wedding chest, her voice broke. A tear escaped and traced a familiar path down her cheek. From the corner of her eye, she saw a flicker of movement. Leanery had turned her head, just slightly. Her dark, empty eyes were fixed on Eliza's face. They watched the tear roll down to her chin and drop onto her sleeve. It was the first sign, the barest acknowledgement that Eliza was not speaking into a void. A week passed in this manner. A routine of shared silence, punctuated by Eliza's quiet monologues. Then, something shifted. Eliza was describing Gideon, her poor, lost horse, talking about his stubborn nature and his fondness for apples. As she spoke, Leanery's hand, which lay listlessly in her lap, moved. Her finger extended and she traced the shape of a horse in the dust at her feet. It was a simple, childlike drawing, but it was perfect in its form and energy. Eliza fell silent, her heart pounding. Leanery's finger rested on the drawing for a moment, then she looked up and met Eliza's eyes. Her lips parted, and a sound emerged, a soft, guttural word. Eliza did not understand it, but she knew what it meant. Leanery then pointed to the drawing, and then looked expectantly at Eliza. "Horse," Eliza whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Leanery nodded slowly. She then erased the drawing and sketched a bird in flight. "Pier," she said, her own voice a rough whisper. "Bird," Eliza supplied. "A trade. A beginning." They continued for an hour. Leanery would draw an object, a tree, the sun, a river, and speak its name in Comanche. Eliza would respond with the English word. They never touched the primer. This was their own book, written in the dust of the cave floor, their own language being built word by word. A bridge was forming, not of pity or instruction, but of mutual exchange. For the first time in months, Eliza saw a flicker of light in Leanery's eyes. It wasn't happiness, not yet. It was something far more fundamental, interest. The smallest seed of a world being rebuilt. The tentative peace was shattered by the arrival of a horse. Not the steady, ground-eating pace of the brothers' ponies, but the heavy, agitated stride of a big American gelding. Eliza knew that sound. Her blood ran cold. She scrambled to the cave entrance and peered through the screen of rocks. It was him. Guthrie. Her brother-in-law sat tall in the saddle, his face a thundercloud of resentment, a rifle resting in the crook of his arm. He must have followed her tracks, relentlessly, stubbornly. He saw the remains of her wagon and dismounted, his movements angry and proprietary. He kicked at the broken wheel, his lip curled in a sneer. "Eliza," he bellowed, his voice echoing off the rocks. "I know you're in here. Come out of there, woman." "Your foolishness is over." Comanche and Taza, who had been returning from a hunt, materialized silently at the edge of the clearing. They flanked Guthrie, their bows held loosely but ready, their expressions hard as granite. Guthrie spun around, startled. His hand went to the pistol on his hip. Well, he spat, his eyes filled with venomous contempt. "Look what the cat dragged in. So this is what you ran off to? Hiding out with savages?" He turned his glare back to the cave. "Get out here, Eliza, before I'm forced to clean this vermin out myself." This was the moment. The fear was there, a cold knot in her stomach, but something else rose to meet it, a hot, protective fury. This was not Guthrie's land. These were not his possessions. And these men, who had shown her a quiet, profound decency, were not vermin. Eliza stepped out from behind the rocks, her head held high, her hands empty. She walked past the brothers and stood directly between them and Guthrie. "This is not your concern, Guthrie," she said, her voice clear and steady, devoid of the tremor she had expected. It was a voice she didn't recognize as her own. "These men gave me shelter when I would have died. This is their home." Guthrie's face purpled with rage. "Their home? This is territory, not a home. And you are my dead brother's wife. What belongs to him, belongs to me now. That includes you, and that horse he bought you." He gestured dismissively toward the cave. "You are coming with me." "Now no," Eliza said. The word was simple, absolute. It hung in the air, a declaration of independence she never knew she possessed. She was no longer a grieving widow, an unclaimed asset. She was a woman standing her ground. Guthrie took a menacing step forward, raising his hand as if to grab her. Comanche drew his bowstring taut, the motion fluid and deadly. Taza slid a knife from his belt. The air vibrated with imminent violence. But before anyone could move, a fourth figure appeared at the mouth of the cave. It was Leanery. She stood straight and tall, the blanket fallen away from her shoulders. The emptiness in her eyes was gone, replaced by a fierce, blazing intelligence. She looked at Guthrie, her expression one of utter disdain. Then, she turned to her brothers and spoke. A stream of sharp, fluid Comanche poured from her, a commander's voice, full of authority and fire. Comanche and Taza exchanged a look of stunned reverence. Leanery then fixed her gaze on Guthrie. When she spoke again, it was in perfect, clipped, mission school English, each word a shard of ice. "My sister," she said, nodding almost imperceptibly toward Eliza, has said no. She took a step forward, her small frame radiating a power that dwarfed Guthrie's brutish size. "You are not welcome here. This is our land. These are our guests. Leave." Now her voice, silent for so long, was the most powerful weapon in the clearing. It cut through Guthrie's bluster and arrogance, leaving him exposed and diminished. He stared at her, his mouth agape, utterly defeated not by the threat of arrows or knives, but by the unshakable will of the woman he would have called a broken savage. He sputtered, searching for a threat, but found none. With a final, hateful glare at Eliza, he turned, hauled himself onto his horse, and rode away, a small, bitter man swallowed by the vastness he had tried to claim. In the ringing silence that followed Guthrie's departure, the world seemed to reset itself. The tension bled out of the air, replaced by a quiet, profound understanding. Comanche slowly unstrung his bow, his eyes never leaving his sister's face. A slow smile, the first Eliza had ever seen, spread across his features, a smile of wonder, pride, and overwhelming relief. Taza slid his knife back into its sheath and simply nodded at Leanery, a gesture of deep, unqualified respect. Eliza looked at Leanery, who stood bathed in the afternoon sun, no longer a creature of shadow but a pillar of strength. Lena met her gaze, and for the first time, her lips curved into a small, genuine smile. It was a shared victory, a triumph born of shared wounds. They had saved each other. Later, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in strokes of fire and lavender, Eliza sat with Lena on the ridge above the cave. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The silence between them now was not one of emptiness, but of comfortable communion. Eliza thought of the woman who had arrived here, a creature of fear and despair, seeking only to escape a storm of dust. She had found shelter, but not the kind she expected. She had found a refuge from the storm within her own soul. Her future was a blank page, an unmapped territory stretching before her. The world she had lost was gone forever. But looking at the resilient line of Lena's profile against the vibrant sky, at the steadfast presence of the brothers moving below, she knew her life was no longer empty. She had stumbled into the heart of a different story, a different family. The shocking request had been answered. And in fulfilling it, she had not just helped to mend a shattered spirit, she had found the scattered pieces of her own.